Okay, so an update on France. We now have, is it the 6th of July? So we have a couple of days in between. Now, they reported, of course, on the 5th that, oh, it all died out. It's all over. It showed a couple of pictures where they're mopping up the operations. They have a couple of smiling people on camera, like repairing, painting over graffiti. Oh, it's all over. Everybody, no, nothing here, nothing to see here. We solved it. But then came the trickle truth, like the next day. Um, we're there, Macron, the great imposter. Oh, by the way, he went to a school. They all go to one school to get the same software, which is the neo-Leninist software, which is you must hate the czar, right? You have to embrace the new, and this is the new. The new is this type of power politics where there's two classes, us and everybody else. And you will direct the social welfare infrastructure, housing, all that. And you will import 10 million mercenaries and their support members, and they will live off of welfare, and they are our captive army of suppressors. So if we decide, again, if there's a class struggle, the democratic classes, the people that have a right to say in their government officially, the petit bourgeoisie, the bourgeois anything, and they can redefine bourgeois to mean someone who, for example, isn't gay, right? They shift the social norm to a radicalized level, and then everyone who's left behind is considered reactionary type of psychological shit testing. They do this to young people all the way down to the grade schools, wherever and it just keeps radicalizing because they keep radicalizing because it's a greed, hatred, and delusional movement. It's greedy people, oh yes. Delusional people, oh yes, and hateful people, oh yes. How hateful can you be? Is to lie in front of the camera that you're taking care of things, and the whole country is out of control. So, they came up with the idea now. Oh, we're going to start blocking social media, or just shut down the internet, like they did during the Arab Spring. Whole European country, so-called civilized country of France, get pulled from the internet. Paris, all those cities. So let's also not forget France's checkered past. So first off, they're real big on just speaking French. You go to France, there's nobody that speaks English. A couple of them, a lot less than in other countries. So it's insular, sort of like Russia. So they control their cultural narratives there, and they're all surprisingly a super leftist. But why is that surprising? Well, then we got to go, well, who invested a lot in Russia? The French actually were very involved in Russia, which also means they were very involved in the revolutionary aspects of it, and they had a nest there. How about this? Old Lenin, he rolled around in Paris a couple of times. Had all different types of organizations there. Oh, that they're super proud of. They give themselves little award ceremonies, and they name streets after themselves. And it's not just about winning, it's about celebrating their infamous selves, their infamous personalities. So, what is it? It's a continuous campaign of agitation and usurpation. And because they're the vanguard, that means they're the people that organize it, they profit by that, everyone at the expense of everyone else. I mean, if you can think of these mercenaries that they bring in from North Africa, they might see that as a leg up. Like they get to be the muscle, they get paid to exist. They can have side businesses that are criminal. They're not going to get busted by the administrators that have them there, or if so, very few of them. Some of them have made fortunes being the narco elements, not just of France, but because it's a bridgehead into the rest of Europe. They've been doing it for decades now. So these slime balls were real active in the 60s. They had a lot of cover stories. They're big into propaganda, which means presenting themselves as infallible and good, and everyone else is bad every day, every hour, every minute that they're active, because this is it. That's what makes them the revolutionaries. So they're in on it. They profit by it, and they were the catalyst. So where are they? Well, they're the toxic blob. They have a few public-facing positions. You have a compromised informational landscape. All of the big media companies owned by them or their agents. So this spreads beyond politics. It goes into the banking sector, goes into security forces, goes into, again, these social housing projects and everything else, and it's diverting funds to their projects that they explain away as enrichment. But in fact, it's subjugation measures, keeping the French down, or whoever they decide is the bourgeois. So it's a never-ending process. So at some point when the French are exterminated, then it will go into their colored classes. Who's the new bourgeois? Well, this one likes to read books and has glasses, wears glasses. This is the new bourgeois. This is the counter-revolutionary threat. And they did it with Pol Pot. Right, that's all been documented. None of that's considered relevant today because that was just him, just isolated. Of course, nothing to do with France. He just studied there. What? So here's another way of looking at it. You could think of it as an imperialist entity that was in the business of colonizing other parts of the world, and then it decided to reverse colonize the home base to maintain their positions. And these are lifelong positions. They don't get voted out, or if they do, they get switched into some other department somewhere. So a blob is just like that. It seeps into the cracks and culminates there. So some people are saying that it's a civil war and that they have 10 million people they have to deal with now, like mercenaries. That you've got the leveraged classes that are economically dependent on a system that is subjecting them, weakening them, attacking their morals, their culture, their way of life, their identity, their history. They're attacking them economically and now physically. So this is funny. So you have the disinformation of us that keep coming back to hate words like racism that they invented straight out of thin air to be applied for the European or Western theater, right? Reverse colonization. So that means colonizing, right? Europe. Not colonizing, not civilizing the rest of the world, barbarizing Europe. But it was funny. So there's this one, of 10 explanations, because people have to come up with an explanation what's going on in Europe. 9 of them were informationally, ideologically twisted. They brought in these hate experts that are completely wrong. So, but one of them was asked the student, what does this mean? And he said, yeah, the media is owned by criminal elements. We don't have a democracy. And he mentioned the word nomenclatura, which is the toxic blob. See, nomenclatura, it's too Latin, it's too distant. Toxic blob, it's real visual. These people are here today amongst us. So all that low-income housing that they allotted to their mercenary forces, that was supposed to go to the uh, poorer, impoverished, and hardworking classes of our people. So just imagine, not only did they not get that, but they brought in monsters to further attack and undermine the culture from the lowest rungs up, when they were set up to support the people that they were exterminating. So you have to be able to realize that, and just realize that they consider it war. So they are the ones that say, we're not at war, we want peace. Meanwhile, they're waging war. And so when you wage war and you wage violence against a population, when you try to unman them, undermine them, destabilize them, distract them, those are warlike measures, and they have warlike results: destructions, dispossessions, violences, anarchies, arsons. So when the physical, but before the physical manifestations of all that violence takes place on such a level that other people notice it, you're already in a civil war. You just haven't called it that because they've got the informational situation under control. They're just managing the public that way. Oh, nothing going on here. We're going to just disconnect for the internet for a couple of days. Maybe, we'll increase the social transfer payments so that they'll be able to buy more stuff and train their bodies on better gym equipment, so when the next riot happens, they'll be able to do a lot more. And until that happens, they can just chill out like in a prison until their wardens give them the signal. So is it diabolical? Yeah, sort of is. Have worse things happen in the world? Certainly. So, but it is organized. It is a network. You can see where they're at. You can identify their wording, the words they use. You can recognize who you're dealing with. And then, of course, people that don't belong. Well, why are they there? Oh, they have a reason, but it doesn't check out. Like they have some false historical narrative. Doesn't check out. Every criminal has a reason for why they do things. Go to a prison. Now, not prisons run by neo-Leninists, certainly. They actually have no good reason to be in prison. Like, I was standing up for my community when I was arrested, and then I haven't been given a trial yet. Like what happens in Belarus. Yeah, not those types of prisons, but go to prisons in the West where the person killed someone for a pair of shoes or something, and then that person will have a reason why they did that. And a lot of them are not repentant. You ask them, would you do it again? They say, hell yeah. The only problem is there was a police at the wrong place at the wrong time. And the more mayhem there is, the less chance of that happening. So is the getting good in France in 2023? You betcha. Just like it was good in Donetsk in 2014. So that's another thing. These people outside of the socialist, neo-Leninist, dictatorial spheres, they're up for grabs until the final prison state of their authoritarianism is established, which is somewhere kick the can down another decade, maybe 5 years. They don't care. As long as they're riding the top of all that chaos and destruction, they're in on it. They don't have morals. They don't have normal ways of thinking about things. They're completely radicalized, inverted, and they're deceptive. They're not coming out and saying that. They play the normal, humble role, even the stupid, incompetent role. Like, I'm trying to do the best possible thing here. I'm a sort of a bumbling idiot, but how do people like that get into positions like that? Well, the answer is they don't. So it's a ruse for the public. It's part of the imposteristic method and ways of operating. So we have exterminationist policy covered by what? Boobery? That's not how it works. So look at the exterminationist policy. Everything about that is in on it. The best scenario is criminal negligence. But the worst scenario is criminal conspiracy. And the worst scenario is more the norm. So no, they don't. They're not idealists. No, they're not well-meaning. It's a ruse. It's them positioning themselves as that when it's manifestly not the case when you inspect the facts on the ground. But how many people go that far? How many people are driving around France doing in-depth anthropological, social, political, economic studies? How many? Let me tell you, probably zero. Or if they are, they're doing it for their side. Maybe they're working for the Indians or Chinese or whoever wants to get a piece now because security isn't really working. So it sort of creates an impression of a free-for-all. That's where the criminal groups come in. They're like, oh, okay, you want to do this? That's funny. We're going to take everything we can. Because we got a roof that is willing to give up everything and everyone, including their culture, for an earthly existence as a betrayer of all good things in Europe. So the immensity of their crimes. I mean, now you could say criminal negligence. I didn't know. I just went to this fancy school and now I'm in on it. So I don't criticize. Who knows what they're all going to say? But how about this? For their informational agents, there should be a minimum of 3 years in prison for people that use the word racism, especially in this context. Even used it as like a vaguely valid theory. 3-year minimum prison term. And egregious cases, you could go up to 5. So that's the information sphere. Now, the people who own those companies, the managers, minimum 15-year prison sentence. Just there doesn't even need to be a judge involved. And that also that extends to the financing. So how were these companies financed? All those banks, all those executives, minimum 15-year prison sentence. So then you need to go through the security services, the economy, business ownership. You need to go through all of the institutions. In fact, I recommend pulling the plug, starting anew, and see who shows up, and filter them. If they came from the old place, they go into a van. And for people like that, you just have to take them on a case-by-case basis, what type of crimes they've been engaged in. And you can also base those crimes based on the statistics of the areas that they administered, and then also how many years they did it. You get somebody who was in 20 years and there was a $1 billion loss based on rioting, that you're looking at a major criminal, like someone that could be shot or hung in a Nuremberg, after a Nuremberg-like trial as a war criminal. But they're going to show up in like a little gray suit with a pudgy belly and a bald head and spectacles. Oh, I was just working for the working class. I just had idealistic ideas and all of that. Like a little mealy-mouthed hunchback spiel, like a Danny DeVito. War criminal. So, France is in a civil war. It has been for a while. And they have a toxic blob. And they don't really have opposition. See, that's just a ruse. Like this Le Pen, who's supposed to be the right, she looks like a fugly Angela Merkel, who's also has pro-Russian affiliations. She's a gigantic imposter. She's part and parcel of it. There's nothing on the right. And the left is the next version of radicalized neo-Leninist. They're the genderist. They want to get, transition kids at the age of like 7. And everyone's like, well, what is that? Well, that is a ways and means of subjecting captive peoples. It's what the Arabs did to their slaves from Africa. They castrated them. So you can do that physically, you can do that emotionally, you can do that mentally. It's psychological terrorism. So how about this? Anybody who wrote any books about that or campaigned for that, minimum 15 years in prison, if not more. So again, how many people are we talking here? Let's say 5,000, 10,000. Who cares? It's not like these people have any right to be amongst civilized nations. They came from a barbarous time, their whole ideology, their whole shtick, and they're not getting any better. So do not shed a tear for any one of them. For their deeds in this realm, they are going to the millions and millions of hell realms. Hungry ghosts, you name it. They're not going to a good place. But you don't have to tolerate that type of nonsense. This side of life, you don't. So any reason you have for doing that, get rid of that reason. Reevaluate whatever's holding you back. Because they don't deserve it. They're not, by civilized standards, even they're not a citizen or a human being. They're war actors in a civilian context, using deceptive means and all different types of shady practices, criminal practices, to commit massive crimes. And they do have innocent victims. And there's so many of them that it's now a statistic reality, which again makes the sentencing of these criminals all that much more automatic, based on where they were working, who they worked for, what they did, and how long they did it. Take all of those factors into account. You don't have to think. You don't have to go through excruciating case-by-case basis. You don't. And it's really a question whether civilization in this stage has the luxury to afford those types of grand gestures to people who are just criminals. That's just the basest, worst of criminals that one could possibly imagine. criminals on a mass scale, industrial scale, national scale, international scale. So don't think for a second you're doing anyone a favor by being so generous with such disasters. You need to douse the fires. Like bring more than you think you need to put the fire out. Don't just throw a couple of drops in their direction. You douse it, it's out. It's not coming back. You throw a bucket and a bucket's not enough. That's not good enough. So you failed. Try again. Bring some more than you did initially. And that's how it gets done, and just repeat that till it's out. And it could be a lifelong situation. You know, these things could go on for another 100 years. Could be a 20. You know, there's been 30-year wars. There's been 100-year wars. So historically, I will say we already are 30 years into a war. But it depends on the region. I'm saying that based on my perspective of the globe. But in Eastern Europe, it does go back to 1917, so that's over 100 years already. So will it take another 100 years before we turn the corner, or will we get snuffed out? That's really just open for debate at this point, but it's asynchronous. It's coming up multiple levels, multiple fronts simultaneously, and it is continuous. It's the continuous campaign. So their biggest advantage is being invisible. There's not too many of them. So 5,000 would be a big dent, especially if it's the top. But do realize that they have international supporters and accomplices. And it can be coming from multiple vectors. You think, oh, it's just coming from here, but they've had other people there, and it's those other people that are signaling that they're not like them, but they're actually operating like them. They're trying to recreate the franchise. So yeah, and then traditional criminal elements, and also the judiciary that's working with them. You need to have a lot less assumptions about what they can and cannot do, or what they haven't or have not done. Get rid of those assumptions, and then your head's in the game. You've boosted yourself into the present moment. The realities on the ground. You're not stuck in the past where they're telling you, oh, this is what we're doing this because this happened in 1939. Here's another thing you need to realize is that the war started before World War II. What they were doing in Spain, very similar. It's just that they did so much that these radicals pushed so many buttons all at once that it did ultimately culminate in a war, and they lost it. But they gave it a run for its money. And Spain needed international support. But it just didn't get international support. It also got these internationals coming in to tip it the other way. But at that time, under those circumstances, it got more support from the right vectors, and it was able to accomplish it, and they had relative peace for a lot longer after World War II than a lot of other countries. They did not stop attacking Germany after 1945. It's just they went past the military and into the social sectors and fields. which again, you go back into the toxic blob of East Germany, perfect example. That hasn't been resolved. These people are Homo Sovieticus, and a lot worse, because they're inverted. They think by destroying their country, they're reinventing it in some type of just model, as some way of atoning for their unatonable sins, that they can get brownie points with Satan by destroying their countries. But they actually think they're building their countries by doing that. So they invested a lot in that sociology. Like, this is not an over exaggeration. This is just scratching the surface of the infamy that they committed here. If it was in Germany, not just in Germany, but also in other countries. U.S., how about this? They targeted the U.S. back in 1919 because it was viewed as an up-and-coming competitor to Bolshevism and Neo-Leninism. 1919. So you can read Fitzgerald's May Day. Put that in context. So all the factories in Philly that got destroyed and infiltrated by these nascent labor movements can be attributed to the Comintern, Neo-Leninist. Oh, but that's just right now in the ripe old age of 2023, 100 years later, that's considered a minority opinion by academicians. That they would dispute me on that. Say, that's not, no. That was just a ruse. That's it. Like the Venona encrypts, that was a ruse too. There was an overreaction to that, McCarthyism, but it actually was an underreaction. And then it stopped. It went away. Never. That was just, it was a boogeyman. Meanwhile, they just steamrolled through the institutions. Totally redefined themselves as social advocates. Took monopoly positions on the political instruments and establishments and institutions, academy. But it's now just during the breakdown and the decentralized spread of information that you can put the pieces of the puzzle together, and France is part of it. It's no coincidence. Communist Party of Vietnam was a former French colony. Just look at Algeria, another one. All of those colonies were subverted. Why? Because they were sort of the weakest link. Then they did reverse colonization. And before you think these were French patriots that did this, they weren't. They were the lowest of the low, the scoundrels of the scoundrels. And they knew they wouldn't be doing it getting to the top on their own merits. So this was all that they felt was left over to them. But see, a decent person still wouldn't do it, but they did. And they do celebrate themselves. They really think they've accomplished wonders. But we can see what the wonders they've accomplished have been for the rest of the good citizens of France, of which I'm sure there are still many. So you have 10 million miscreants, probably more than that, 3 times the size of Estonia's population in France, running havoc on everything that your forefathers fought for. And so that's the report back. There you go, black and white. That's the report. So you do with that what you will, but I wouldn't put too much money on the franchise getting better for normal, decent, dignified, respectable, and people of integrity. I don't see that happening at this point, but somebody could turn the corner and start dealing with the realities on the ground and not the fairy tales that you would rather believe to be true, to escape from the horrors of this occurring. But realize also France is not alone. It's happening in a lot of different countries. It happened in Venezuela. Right? It happens in weak countries, all different types of African countries. Congo, this has been going on for a while. South Africa, Brazil. Yeah, and India. India's big into it. So you need to rethink that vector. A lot of these other people just show up. Why are you in France? Oh, well, I have a funny story. I've done everything right. Well, the wrong thing you did was coming to a country that did not want to have you there, where you do not belong. So doing the right thing means moving back or going somewhere else where the situation isn't as degrading and degraded as it is. Because you could be easily misunderstood for the real thing, and there's so much more of that out there. It really is pulling someone's leg to claim exceptionalism under conditions like this. It's quite a claim. Because imagine if 100 people say the same thing in a day, but yours is really the true story. You're expecting people that are being ground into the dirt on every level by marauding hordes to take your story at face value. So, of course you can do that, but it might not be so successful. You might have a little bit of understanding for the people that don't have time to go through all the funny stories. So if you had a good run, cash out and leave. If you didn't, go anyway. Because what's going to remain there is not going to be all that pretty. But there might not be remediation. You might be right. You might be able to ride it out. Just realize people are not going to believe you. It's been too many lies, too many people implicated, too many industries, too much money, too much time, too much violence. So, but yeah, good times ahead. I don't think it could be any other way. You should think in terms of a certain amount of inevitability and fatalism. It's what people in the East do. It saves their souls. A lot of times, conditionality. The Buddha will also back this up. Conditionality. You are not responsible for all of these events and actions and betrayals and networks. You're not. And okay, although you could say you have been victimized, that's not the right path to take. This is just the way it is. Don't think in terms of what could have been or making comparisons between an ideal, just world and this world on earth and then suffering because of that. That's what idealists do. Don't do it. You will burn out. You cannot have a perfect world on this plane of existence. It doesn't exist. This world is this way. And also don't glorify the past. They did the best they could with what they had. Some people are up for a time and then they're down. Some people go away forever. Their language dies out. This could be the final straw for French. It just dies out. become some type of pigeon in the world. So how many times has that happened? There's temples in the jungles of Chichen Itza. Where are the people that built them? Where's the culture, the language, the artifacts? They're gone. Now, what killed them? Was it other tribes? Was it malaria? Was it something else? Was it a combination? Was it a doomsday cult? We don't know. We will never know, potentially. We might know if technology increases and we have the right experts to have the right access to the right information or new information. Maybe. But maybe not. So this idea that and Germany too. Germany's on the path to extinction. Not just linguistically, but genomically. Who else? They're certainly trying to murder as many Ukrainians as they can with just throwing ordnance around at Mach speeds into civilian infrastructure. So what might have been considered impossible 2 years ago is really possible. It's really happening. So it really doesn't benefit you to just live in a state of denial or alternative reality, which is the avenue they're giving you, by the way. They're saying, oh, believe this. We've got the fairy tale room here. You're a good person. Keep telling yourself you're a good person while you're working against your nation, your people, and your culture. They'll let you into that room. Don't go in. You don't need to feel like you're a good person. It's better to know you're a good person. And you know how you know you're a good person? Because good is good. So good gets better. The better you get, the more good you have. That's how you know. So just use it as your antenna. Don't let people tell you this is good. And it shouldn't just feel good, right? It's not a funny story. It's not a fairy tale. It's reality. How do you feel good about yourself? Well, living with integrity, living with moral principles, not being greedy, not being hateful, and not being deluded. That's how you do it. So, and it's not easy. There's stories of Buddhist monks who were captured by the Chinese in Tibet. They lived there for thousands of years, undisturbed. All of a sudden, the Buddhist monk is a criminal and put in a prison. And then tormented. These people, they have this viewpoint that you're not human, or that you're an anachronism, or they don't need you, or you're an enemy. That's what they've been programmed to believe, and it's easier for them to believe that too. So it really helps them do their job. Because if they didn't believe, they wouldn't do the job. So they have to believe, so that it's just the way it is. It's just like this. It can happen. But I do know the Buddhist monk, he got through his captivity. And someone asked him, was there any time when you were ever afraid? And he said, yes, one time. It's like, what happened? He said, I thought I would get angry due to one of the many outrages that was performed. He thought that was his fear. So adopt that practice. It doesn't mean that you're going to get everything you want in life. How could he have expected such a reality? And yet that's what life gave to him. This was his karma. So come back to the fatalism of it. It had to be this way. It couldn't have been different. It's just like this. And when you do that, you make a clean break from self-accusation, because it's not good. That's not good at all. Nothing about it is good, and also nothing about it is just or true. It's just you had this expectation was not met. The difference between the two is suffering. It's dissatisfaction. Go all the way down to the smallest thing. I didn't expect to get a mosquito bite. I got bitten by a mosquito. Vague dissatisfaction with life to the extremities. Life should have been like this. I should not have been robbed in court. I should not have been attacked by villainous, barbarous, imported thugs. I shouldn't have had this. I shouldn't have. You could go, see, that'll take you into a hole. So when you notice yourself digging, just stop. Pat the earth. Touch it, as the Buddha did, and be a witness to your own practice.